Hi everyone, welcome back. Lately I've been in a bit of a reading slump. And so I find it really useful sometimes to just pick up books that are really short in length and are kind of easy to get through, but still carry a lot of weight and impact. The first book I want to talk about is a novel by George Eliot called Silas, Marner. This is a book that I've written essays on, and it's George Eliot's shortest novel. This little edition that I have here by Wordsworth Classics is 160 pages long, and that includes the notes at the back and the introductory pages. So it's really easy to get through, and it really packs a huge emotional punch. It's one of the most sentimental sort of reading experiences that I've had, honestly. It's about a elderly man called Silas who lives in isolation, and he's sort of a social outcast in this English village that he lives in. And he has come to this state because of a troubled past, which I will not get too much into. But the way he sort of has been outcast, he becomes this really miserly sort of person as a coping mechanism for what has been done to him. But then one day he discovers a orphan little girl at his doorstep and is essentially forced to adopt her and take care of her. What follows from then on is a very sort of sentimental story that unravels. We kind of see the progression of Silas as he comes out of that state of isolation, finds purpose in his life through that kind of paternal role that he now has to take on. And we also see the development of the little girl and the woman that she turns into, and how she came to be that orphan that showed up on his doorstep. And it all sort of unravels in this fable, fairy tale-esque sort of way. But one thing I really enjoy about this book is that it's written in George Eliot's characteristic style of realism, even though it has these sort of fable elements to it. And it's just a really beautiful, sentimental read, and I think it's the kind of thing that really stays with you and really pulls at your heartstrings. And honestly, I just love to reread this anytime I get a chance to. The second novel I want to talk about is a heavier one. This is Oroonoko by Aphra Behn. And this novel was published, I believe, in 1688, and it's considered one of the earliest novels written in the English language, and I think that is reason alone to want to read this. This is a really gut-wrenching story about an African prince who is in love with a woman from his own village, but both he and the woman are taken captive into slavery and transported to the British colony of Suriname. So the story does follow this kind of romance between the eponymous Oroonoko and the woman that he loves, but it's also about the humiliations and the trials that he faces as a result of being taken captive. One thing that is really important to keep in mind when reading this is that the author Aphra Behn was obviously a white British woman, and although this novel is often seen as one of the earliest anti-slave narratives, in the sense that it really shows the brutality of slavery, Aphra Behn herself was far from an abolitionist, so it's important to keep that in mind. And another thing this novel is really known for is that it really adheres to the antiquated trope of the noble savage, or this idea that certain colonized subjects were elevated or deserved more sympathy because of their nobility, because Oroonoko is obviously presented as this higher class kind of slave. He's portrayed as, being very well built and sort of having Eurocentric features, and that Aphra Behn uses as devices to humanize him essentially to the audience that she was writing for. Reading depictions of, the transatlantic slave trade and slavery is really difficult. You really have to be in sort of the right mindset to read this, because the depictions of slavery in this are quite graphic. I just think it's a good gateway to slave narratives if you really want to sort of start getting into that and just add to your knowledge. The next one is a book of poetry, and I'm recommending this one in particular. It's the Penguin Classics edition of Lyrical Ballads by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The reason I'm recommending this particular edition is because I think it's a really good selection, and it really just encapsulates what Lyrical Ballads was about. I think if you're looking to get into romantic poetry, this is a really good gateway as well. These poems can be really read by anyone, and they can be read into as much as you like, because these are poems that are pleasing to the ear without having to dig deeper for a meaning, but the meaning is also there as well. I mean, this collection is known for having laid the groundwork for the romantic movement. Themes of rustic life and nature, the power of memory, the passage of time are all present in this collection, and I think it can be used as a really beautiful meditation for the power of nature and the emotions, the intensity of emotions that the natural world evokes within us. Next, I want to talk about Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, which is an incredibly famous extended essay. This book is quite special to me because my A-level English teacher actually gave this to me as a present. I don't know if you can see this little note in here, but A Room of One's Own is a meditation or a sort of reflective essay that examines the struggles of women in literature, and it sort of advocates for the financial independence and personal space that is required for a woman in particular to be creatively successful. It's very readable, and it's very enjoyable as well, because Woolf sort of draws on personal reflections and her feminist philosophy, and also thought experiments and some literary analysis thrown in there. It sort of feels like you're watching Virginia Woolf think through those ideas in her own mind. There's a really interesting example in here where she does this kind of thought experiment where she imagines what Shakespeare's sister was like, and she sort of imagines her as this really gifted woman who is destined for her talents to sort of go to waste and be doomed because of the role that women at the time had in society, and the kind of things that occupy their time, the kind of daily labors that took up their time, that prevented them from really having careers or names for themselves. I think it's really interesting sometimes to look back on older kind of feminist texts, and especially something as seminal and readable as this. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write. I think that central kind of idea or message is quite empowering and quite timeless as well. I don't think there is ever a time where that particular idea would not apply. Finally, I'm going to recommend a modern classic, a play in this case, and that is Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. And sometimes I find that if you're really bogged down by really long descriptive books, it's really nice to break it up with a play which is just purely dialogue. And especially if you're reading a play as sort of witty and truly dramatic and just really snappy like this. It's about this aging traveling salesman who is just desperately trying to provide for his nuclear American family and desperately failing at it. It's about a man who is just really deeply entrenched in the sort of capitalist system and really espouses to the American dream. And it's about how he watches his life crumble before him as he's hit with financial crises. And it shows his kind of slow descent into madness as a consequence of that. And ideas of family as well, and how capitalism even seeps into the very kind of dynamics and their ability and inability to support each other under that. Something that I find so striking about this play is the way that it unravels all these themes under capitalism. So the main character, Willie, his failures and self-delusion and the law and his loss of dignity. These are things that are amplified under capitalism, and he feels the blows of that so intensely, and in equal measure tries to deny them, which is what leads to the tragedy that's really built into the title of this play. It's just such a devastating little work that's wrapped up in 2 acts, which is also quite interesting. I think it's a really nice detail as well that Arthur Miller chooses to go against the traditional 3-act structure, sort of cutting Willy's life short in the process. So those were 5 little classics to get you out of a rut. I hope you guys don't mind that I'm still trying to experiment a bit with how I make these videos. So let me know what you thought about this one actually. And before I go, I just want to say a really huge thank you to the people who have been commenting on some of my videos and the people who have been subscribing, because you guys really have been making my day, and it really is keeping me going and like wanting to push ahead and try to continue with these videos. And I like to post at least once every single week. So if you're into that, if you're into what I'm doing here, I hope you stick around, and I will be back very soon.